coming to you from the world of fire and heat. It's Nothing Venture, Nothing Game. I'm your host, GM Jared, and I'm joined by Steve.
Yep.
And today, we're going to do a quick overview of the game Viking Death Squad. So in this video, we're going to be doing a quick overview of the game Viking Death Squad, published by modiphius, created by Runehammer Games and Hankrin Ferinale, who you can find the link to Runehammer, YouTube's webpage, YouTube's channel in the link below, because we're just going to link them because it's their stuff. And you should go check out the channel on Runehammer. A lot of cool stuff there. So, overview, elevator pitch, Viking Death Squad. My elevator pitch to you is think Warhammer 40K. Got drunk, hooked up with a Valkyrie, and then to throw in the mix, the Doom guy showed up for a Devil's Three-Way. And this is that baby. It is anarchy, chaos, and just everything metal. Like, if you think, you know, just imagine like 1980s metal bands, not like hair bands, like metal bands, like Metallica, Black Sabbath, stuff like that. That's what Viking Death Squad, that's the elevator pitch. Your characters are going to die. It says it a lot in the book, like aggressively it's stated. The characters are probably going to die. So have fun. And that's one of the things both myself and Steve kind of touched, really resonated with, was just the book says a lot of times, like, hey, have fun with it. Have fun with your players and just kind of roll with the punches and get in the mix of this mindset of just like awesomeness, like be awesome. So you understand this game takes place, the lore, first off, the lore is amazing. This book is like 90% lore, where everything else is driven from that. The first thing you do when you open this up, it kind of jumps right into that lore. There's a lot of like history behind here, because this game takes place in the year 10,000, and Urth is in shambles. Basically, these aliens came. They're in the book, they're called war pigs, and they started like terraforming and destroying and ravaging Urth and killing humans. And then hell opened up in the middle of it, because like, why not? The devil was like, yeah, let's do this. And the devil went to war with the aliens and the humans, and the humans were like, yo, what is going on? And then the humans found savior in the Immortals. And the Immortals are like these ancient gods or demigods who come down or who are around and just bring the pain. That's really that, like, they're just freaking epic. And that's really, you need to understand Viking Death Squad, is the lore kind of drives the game forward. And in that, everything else falls into place. Originally, when I was reading this book, I was like, okay, cool. The lore is pretty dope. You know, it goes over the factions on the planet Earth, what's going on.
It really leans into its lore and its aesthetic.
Yes, very much. With that being said, you know, when I was reading it, I was like, okay, there's a lot of cool stuff in here, a lot of lore. The first chapter of the book, even before it gets into the rules, is just the lore chapter. You're going to go through a lot of lore. I highly suggest reading it with your friends, kind of just giving them the book themselves and letting them read this, because there's no way they come into this game without reading that lore. What do you think about that, Steve?
Yeah, I definitely think that when I was initially going through the book, I'm looking for, how do I play the game? How do I get in this game? How do I make my character? How do I fight things? How do I, get more powerful? That's what I generally look for. And I'm not saying that lore isn't important, but I like to understand the mechanics of a game first. And then I will say with this game, when I started to go to the lore section, I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's the first section, so I'll just read it. And it made me want to wish that this wasn't a rule book. This was an actual just like book where I was just reading a story, because it was freaking epic. And it really gets you a sense of not only the stakes, but how the immortals and the humans work together and why they work together and how bad things really are, but also how weird the technology is, because obviously this is far-flung future. I will just make one reference of the fact that the war pigs, the bad guys, fly in ships that are basically giant iron Borg cubes with no visual outside. They can't actually see outside, so they fly until they hit something. And they go, oh, there's a planet. Let's just absorb all the technology that's here and then fly to the next planet. I thought that was hilarious.
Yes, 100%. Same. I did the same thing. When I was reading this, I jumped into the character, like how to understand the characters. I learned my games through character creation. And then I jumped into character creation and I was like, wait, what? And that's because I was like, wait, there's only 2. What's going on here? And we'll get into character creation, but like it's the moment I got confused, I texted Steve. I was like, Steve, man, I don't understand what's going on. He's like, you gotta read the lore. And I was like, the first chapter? He was like, yeah, read the lore. And I was like, oh, I literally made that sound. I was, oh, because I like, lore, I feel, a lot of times lore in a lot of games isn't so much a part of the system, right? Like they are 2 different spheres of influence. You have the lore and the game.
Yeah, it's like a background, like a backdrop. The lore is like a backdrop to what you're actually doing.
Yeah, like you could play Dungeons and Dragons without knowing and all the Dungeons and Dragons lore. This game, you should read the lore because it heavily influences the game, and the 2 are one. It's really the yin yang that's going on here. You have like this crazy story and this really interesting system, and they just come together very nicely. And I think, because of that, it drew me in a little deeper as I went. So the first thing you'll notice is aesthetically, the book is mostly black and white. Everything is written black and white. It's easy to read in certain parts, and then some of the italic words can be a little confusing. So that's really...
So they use this very stylized text in some of the words, and some of that's a little, I will say a little hard to read, but eventually you get used to it. But a lot of most of the book is in very clear text. It's just some of like the titles and some of the more like descriptive pages go into this like very stylized text.
The next section, after all the lore and all that jazz, you kind of go into roll the dice, and this is the system itself. The system is a D6 system, so you should have at least 6 D6s or 6
or more
die 6 or more. You should probably have a bunch. Just if you're a gamer, I'm sure you got a ton. I'm like 1,000,000% positive you have a ton. But if you don't, you could probably scrounge up from a board of Monopoly and other games a bunch of 6-sided die. The DM should have a full set of dice. So your typical D20, D6, D4, all of those, because there's reasons. The GM sometimes there are tactics the monsters can take, and that's a D8 system for the most part. There are like random tables, D6, D20 stuff. There's a D100. There's like sometimes it says like how many monsters show up, and that's a different die depending on how like badass the monster is. Like there are like these things called dogs, and that's like a D100 because like there's just an infinite number of them. And then there's like fucking like Armageddon monsters, and it's like a D4 because there's only so many, right? So that's kind of the trade-off. But so the system, D6 system, super simple. Everyone can do it. You just roll d6s, and that's kind of how it works. So understanding that it's a d6 system, cool. Now I'm going to throw it over to Steve, because Steve really explained how the system worked the best, and his explanation really easy. It's like a twofold system. Steve, take it away.
So in Viking Death Squad, you have basically two modes of the game. You have when you're not in active combat, and you have while you're in active combat. So while you're not in active combat, each player takes a turn. So the GM will indicate a player and say, okay, you have one action. What are you doing? Oh, I want to talk to an NPC, or I want to make a skill check to see if I can find something, or I want to move to another area. So the way the system works with areas is it's very much similar to Index Card RPG, where areas all have images. Like, look, we're in the graveyard, right? Well, no, we want to go to the junkyard because there's stuff there we might need. Or we know that the cave of horrors is where the bad guy's holding something we need to we want to take out the bad guy. So movement isn't an actual number of units, is I want to move to the next scene. Or I want to talk to, King Nordlob because he wants to give me a quest or something. So it's a very simple system of what are you doing? You have one action, figure it out, and then everyone has that, and then the GM will then educate, and then you roll again. You keep going through that unless there is combat. So at the beginning of combat, everyone rolls their speed. So speed equals not only how hard you are to hit, but also how fast you go in the turn. So speed is a very important stat. So everyone rolls their speed in the beginning, and that becomes the number that things have to roll to hit you, which is a very interesting concept.
Yeah. So, what's really funny is, as Steve said about speed, the book actually makes that reference, how important it is. The book actually comes forward and says, yo, speed is actually really important. So you might want to look into having a pretty good speed when you build your character. It's not everything, but because it is your initiative, and it's also how hard it is to hit you, it's kind of a decent stat that you want to have. And the book references, which again, I love, because the book is self-aware. The writer of this, the team that, the people that made this were very self-aware of the game itself. I have my arguments on certain things in 5th edition D&D, on certain stats being the most important. But I'm glad the book was just like, hey, yeah, speed's where it's at right now. But yeah, so take it away, Steve. Sorry to interject like that.
Yeah, that's okay. So the other cool thing is, anytime a character wants to do something that's not listed in the book, I want to jump over that chasm, or I want to, jump off the train and grab the guy and then punch him in the face, or something. You're trying to do something that's not specifically listed in the rules. This is when the GM will determine the difficulty, how hard is what you're doing, by choosing a number of dice. So something is easy, it's only 2 dice. Something is really it's amazing and it's really heroic or amazing, that's 5 or 6 dice. And what the GM does is they roll those dice, and that becomes the difficulty. So there's quite a bit of variance of a 6D or very hard challenge could still be very easy because the DM rolled very low, or a very easy challenge could be very hard because they rolled very high. But that's the GM that says, okay, the difficulty number for you jumping the chasm is not that hard, so we rolled 2 dice and you had a 9. So you have to use whatever skill, how you're explaining to me what you're doing, you got to beat a 9. We can go over a lot of different where the dice come from. We're going to go over that in character creation, but you have to determine how you're getting over the chasm and what's your best chance to doing it. Yeah, you could use, let's say you want to use your speed to try to get enough speed and run over the chasm, or you want to use maybe some other stat, or try to convince the GM to let you use another stat because of how you're using it. Oh, I want to use my wits to be able to build a bridge to walk across, or whatever it is. So the difficulty system is very free form because it is random. It's random to a point. So a 2 dice skill can never be over a 12, and a 6 dice skill can never be less than a 6, but still there's a lot of variance there.
If I may interject again, Steve, on this, the test, it is stated that the GM should let the player know the number they roll.
Yeah.
So it's not hidden, right? Like, which is kind of very different. It's very different from other systems. The GM knows the DC. It's written in the encounter. It's whatever, and then you, the player, have to roll higher than this number that I have set down. Now that goes into the concept of fudging and you know, rules. But I like this. It's everyone's facing forward. You know, you know, with that, it's kind of like, do you really need a GM screen? I mean, you know, because I'm giving you the information ahead of time. I rolled a 6. This is an amazing test. I just rolled a 5.
Yeah.
Out of, you know, on a 6d6 check. So you have to beat a 5, and then hopefully you can beat that, you know, with your skill. But yeah, that was just what I wanted to say was, like, I think it's interesting that as the GM, I have to alert my players the number, and I've been doing that already. Like, if you listen to our podcast, I'm like, yo, the AC is 18, the difficulty is a 12 or a 17, you know, and then my players just know, you know, and then it never stops them. Yeah, so that's just the player test, and coming from an eternal GM, that's my 2 cents on it. But back to you, Steve.
So the interesting thing, because of that system and because of the DCs are out in the open, there's a reason for that. And it's actually another game mechanic that the players have access to, and it's called Resolve. So Resolve is a pool of dice that each player has, different depending on how much you put into the Resolve stat. That, like I said, we're going to get more to that in character creation, but anytime you make a check, anytime you roll dice, that it's a D6 check, you can choose to add Resolve dice, kind of showing your mettle, showing you're stealing your Resolve to defeat the encounter. But your Resolve pool is expendable. So if I only have 3 dice, that's for the whole encounter. So if I blow all my 3 dice to hit you once, well, then I'm not going to have that. There are some skills that help you rejuvenate that, and also resting rejuvenates your Resolve pool. But if I go like, oh man, well, I only have a 2 dice attack, and he rolled, you know, a high speed, and I'm like, I can't physically, I'll have to roll 3 6s. Like, oh man, maybe I should throw 2 more dice of my Resolve to try to beat that check. So, or I'm trying to jump that gap, and I'm really slow. I only have like a 1 or 2 dice speed, and he rolled really well. Oh man, I had to jump through Resolve, make sure I don't fall into that chasm and die.
I mean, this game dies a lot, so don't jump chasms, or make sure you got a bag. And then another thing the system does use often, and it ties into both playing the game and also character creation, is when you roll crits, things fire off. A lot of things fire off, actually. The moment you roll a crit, you get a rune, and the moment you get 3 runes, you get an additional boost to your character. Additionally, when you do crit, you could get extra turns. You do more on that section. So there's a lot of stuff on critting and how that works. And then here, I'm just going to take a quick second, just so you know, it's like the other stuff, right? So when you read this book, there's always like these little addendums, or it has to do with that section, but it's like not the real super important stuff. This is like, you know, you got your steak and your potatoes, and this is like the salt and pepper. You know, it adds flavor to it, but you should still read it. But it's all the other stuff, right? And this is I love the number of the beast. If you roll trip 3 6s, no joke, this is in it, and this is another reason why I love this book. On any roll during a session, if 3 and no more than 3 6s appear, the roll counts as a crit success, and the character refills their Resolve die. Players are invited to recite the number of the beast by Iron Maiden. This is exactly what's written, by the way. So you should recite the number of the beast by Iron Maiden. At that moment, the GM should consider a way to bring Lucifer's dark influence on that moment, attack roll or scene in some way, even if it's simply by omnipresent sinister laughter. That is freaking awesome. And when we get to play this, if anyone rolls trip 6s, we're going to just have Iron Maiden play in the background, and they can copy strike us, because that's freaking amazing. Sorry, I had to interject. If you like, but that is just kind of the aspect of this game. If that doesn't tell you kind of where this game's going, this is the biggest middle finger to the satanic panic of the 80s. If anyone remembers that, you know, me and Steve kind of weren't playing at that time, but I remember my parents having a knee-jerk reaction when I was like, hey, yeah, I play D&D. They were like,
mine as well.
What? I was like, come on, guys. You already know I'm a Satanist. Let's keep moving on. But yeah, speaking of moving on, let's hop into the next section, and that's character stuff. So, character creation, or the Crucible of Heroes, which super metal, dope picture. Once again, black and white, but then you have this character, bright yellow armor, and that just draws your eye right away. It's the aesthetic of the whole book. So, character creation, you get to choose from one of two races, or beings, immortal entities that are like 7 feet tall and about 7 feet wide, and God forbid you have a small doorway because they're just going through it, or human, generic ass human, because this takes place on Urth. That's it. Human, immortal. When I was getting into this, I was like, what? And then I read it and I was just like, oh, okay. It makes sense, because again, ties back to the lore. That's the reason why there's only just human and immortals, because they're the ones fighting everything else. So basically, the moment you start playing, you know, they get into it, they said, write down your character background, right? And this is the most important step in Viking Death Squad, because your character's background is 3 brief notes, and that's it. You get an oath, a thing you must do, a debt, a personal organization you must repay, and a code, a thing you will never do, no matter how bad it gets. So, like, your oath could be, I have to free my family from the imprisoned penal colony. A debt, I owe a thieves guild who smuggled me out. So they got me out of the penal colony, and my code, I never leave a person behind, and that's it. That's my character backstory, and that's an epic backstory.
Yeah, and the cool thing about it is because they understand, because there is differences. Obviously, there's obvious differences between an immortal and a human. So, yes, given the different power scale that they have for each of these characters, they actually have lists of sample human oaths and immortal oaths, because also their just idea of what they should be doing is completely different. Human and immortal debts and human and immortal codes. Just to give you, for instance, like the human code is like, you will never ally with hell, you will never kill another human. But an immortal code is, you will not harm another immortal even if they are an enemy. Or that you refuse to use guns, or it's just cool stuff like that.
Yeah. So again, it depends on how you want to play. So human, immortal. Then you have your stats, right? Your innate stats. You have power, aim, speed, wits, guts, and resolve. Power is how hard to hit a target. Punch them, smash them, hit them with a sword. Aim, ranged weaponry, or in throwing things. Very simple. Wits, discerning information, scouting distances, finding clues. It's a lot of stuff that we've all dealt with. Guts, this is basically like your constitution. If you want to like figure it out, it's just resisting poisons, the element shock, or fear, or stunning effects. Like, oh man, cannibals! Some people might freak out. You're like, nah, I'm cool. I've seen that. I've seen worse. And resolves, and we already spoke about that. That's that special pool of dice where you want to just keep pushing yourself. So, your character starts all with 1/6 base for free, and then
you get 4 dice to assign to each these stats. There's no restriction of how high these can go to. I think a limit of 6. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 6. I was right. Yeah, so you start with a base of 1 in every stat, and you can get a maximum of 6. You start with 4 dice that you can pick where you want them. You can dump them all into one stat. You can have a more average character. It's up to what you're really trying to do.
Yeah. Basically, just so you understand, he kind of the book breaks it down. So 1 die is your grunt, and 4 dice are masters. So if you have 4 die in anything, you're kind of a master of that, or you're like this legendary person. Anything beyond that, it's like super duper chaos heroes. With that, there is a difference between humans and immortals, right? Besides the name, right? So obviously immortals can die in this. We'll touch on how that actually affects the game, because there is a negative condition to being an immortal. So humans, Steve, what do humans do, and why would I ever want to play a human and not a dope ass immortal?
We have humans and we have immortals. So the first things first, humans are nowhere near as tough as immortals. They die very quickly, and death is almost assured for them. So like, why the hell would I want to play one? So obviously, being less hardy than an immortal, your base stats reflect that. So you get +1 aim and +1 speed. So you're better at range, and you're better at running. You're faster than immortals, because immortals are big lumbering, brick shit houses. And regardless of immortal or human, you pick a special skill. You have a choice between one of 2 skills, and then you have, as a human, you get 6 dice to assign to skills. You can pick between 1 and 3 skills. You also gain 4 basic items, 2 armor, and we'll actually go. There's a limit of your inventory of 10 items. Only 4 of your 10 items can be armor, because we're going to get into why armor is important in just a second. So the humans get 4 basic items, they get 2 armor, and they cannot use heavy items because they're just not strong enough to lift these giant iron mechanic, even giant shields and stuff like that. So they are, they're weak. But then also you pick a role, and the different roles, they actually give you kind of a direction that your character can go in. Also, it gives you bonus, most of the time it's bonus skills. Some of them give you bonus items as well. With your role, or you can pick brand new skills if you want to just pick up brand new skills that can give you a wider berth of choices. So that one of the benefits of humans is they get more skills than the immortals. The immortals are more focused in 1 or 2 things, and the humans are more versatile, which happens in most games. What's about armor? And we haven't said how many hit points they have. The thing is, armor is your life. Everyone, if you hit an unarmored target, they just die. There isn't any mechanic of like, oh no, I can save to. No, you just get your face punched in, and you're a pile of bones on the ground. So with humans, you have 1 life. So your armor is super important. With the immortals, because they are immortals, they actually get 3 lives. So if they run out of armor in the middle of a fight and they still stay in there and they get hit and they're going to die, if the party happens to survive the encounter and they can kind of retreat or rest, the immortal will come back in about an hour. Given the fact that they're not in combat. They won't come back in combat, but they will come back outside of combat. After 3 times that happens, though, the immortal is actually dead. So some of the bad guys will put the name Immortal to the test.
And speaking of Immortal, why don't we jump into creating why you would want to play one of the Immortals? So we already now know they could die 3 times before, it's the eternal slumber. So what makes the Immortals different than humans, obviously, than the name and the fact that they get 3 little hearts underneath their the health bar, and yeah.
So instead of starting with aim and speed, they start with 1 dice in power and 1 dice in guts, because they're hardy and they just love getting in the mix. They also get a choice of 1 of 2 special skills specific to the Immortals. And instead of getting 6 dice to separate within 1 to 3 skills, they only get 4 dice to pick between 1 or 2 skills. They also have an immortal specific roles. Could be like the Viking warrior or the shield maiden or the rune cutter, and they all come with either skills or plus the skills or items that they start with. They also start with 2 basic items instead of 4 for the human. They start with 4 armor because they could just hold a lot more stuff, but they can't use we haven't talked about different types of items. Obviously, we talked about there's items that are heavy, and in this case, there's also items called circuits, or basically technology. The Immortals are from a time so long ago that they just don't get it. They're like, I don't get this stupid technology, so I don't even bother with it. So they can't use anything that is labeled circuit. So the humans can use circuits, but they can't use heavy items. The Immortals can use heavy items and not circuit items.
One of the things also that you kind of, as an Immortal, unlike the humans who get a bunch of skills, you get to choose one special skill. So like Cunning Learner or Go Unnoticed, right? So those are their special skills, right? That's what you get for being a human. The Immortals.
Oh yeah, the special skills. Yeah, I didn't mention them.
Yeah, the Immortals are durable, where they take no damage from collateral sources, including falling stuff, heat, cold, or Sunder Expert. Whenever you score a hit, you can choose to apply it to an enemy gear or armor. So they're just really dope at destroying shit. Because they're Viking immortal monster men and women and humans.
Yeah, so this goes into the idea of gear can also be broken. So armor has 3 hit points. Basically, every piece of every inventory item, unless it's specified, has 3 hits. So you have armor on, you take 3 hits, the armor is destroyed, and then now you're armorless. Like I said, you could take a turn instead of attacking, or instead of using a skill, you can decide to take armor out and put it on just to make sure you don't die. But the Sunder Expert specifically can attack someone's gear. So if they have a weapon that's really causing a problem, or they're using some sort of weird technology that's firing lightning at people, I can specifically, as an Immortal, every time I hit, instead of attacking the person and hitting their armor, I can choose to try to destroy their gear.
So once you do all of that, once you figure out, what your role is, whether you are a immortal dead talker or a human exorcist, once you build your character, you're kind of set to go. But then there are a number of skills, and skills are important because you're like, sure, skills are important. That doesn't make any logical sense. Obviously skills are important. You're an idiot, Jared. No, skills are really important because, after 5 successful uses of any one skill, you gain a die in it. So you instantly gain a die. And this can be added to the skill used or placed in a brand new skill of your choice. Once it's gained, you start again, right? So it just goes once 5, start again. 5, start again. There are a number of skills here, right? You have stuff from combat repair to finding gear to mechanics, where you fix broken machines and stuff like that. There's a ton of skills here, right? There's a lot of different skills. They all have different ways to use them. Some of them are combat based, some of them are outside of combat. They're just skills, right? The thing is, more or less, most of them factor into the thing, but they also say, hey man, like if there isn't a skill here, just kind of roll with it and just use your best judgment. And that's kind of a really important thing. I apologize, Steve.
And they even bring up that the Viking Death Squad asserts that sound and music are as critical to this game as the actual rolling dice, making your skill checks, killing monsters, trying to repair your armor. That they even suggest using music to kind of like heighten the experience of the game.
All right. So next section, the section we've all been waiting for, the enemies, right? Because what TTRPG is there without an enemy, right? The Hobbit would be a really boring story without Smaug. So you have your enemies. Basically, me and Steve were going over this. Enemies are really cool. Their stuff is very broken down, right? It's very easy to read. There's the little blurb about what they are, you know, their lore. There's a little blurb, cool little picture, so it helps you describe it. Maybe you just want to show that to your players. Pretty cool. Tells you their speed, so that's how hard it is to hit someone. Number appearing in the scene, so that will be, and this, remember we spoke about this earlier, you know, the Borg, this is your generic enemy. So number appearing 3d12, so you roll 3d12 and that's the number appearing. They all rolled 2d10, that's all, 2d6, so 2 die 6, so everything is 2d6, so that's it. Their melee attack, they claw and blade, and stuff like that. They have 0 gear, and their speed is 2. They're easily killed. They literally have 1 hit to kill. They don't have armor, so that's it. So that's why there's so many of them, is because you're just kind of, you know, like in all great action movies, the heroes go through a swath of bad guys. You're John Wicking through a whole mess of bad guys, you know. So that's kind of their thing. And then this is the thing I fell in love with. This was what grabbed my eye. Tactical rolls. This is a D8 roll, and it tells you what your monsters are going to do. Roll a D8. Oh, it says blaster, so it blasters them. A clumsy ranged pistol. So I rolled 2d6, and that's it. And boom, that's the enemy.
Now, the thing is that in the earlier section of the monster section, it even says, never feel bound by rolling a tactics die and having the monster do something that's dumb. If your monster has a clear action that it can take, it's okay to not roll the tactics die and just pick. Okay, you know, it's standing right next to something. It was, you know, the Annihilator says crush, destroy a terrain feature, leave it blocked crater behind it. You know, maybe there's something that the heroes are trying to use as cover, and the Annihilator says nope, and he goes smash. You know, that makes sense. But if you're strapped for I don't know what to do, you roll those 2d8, and then all that stuff happens, and it's a bad time for the players.
Yeah, you that's when you get Scour Beam and Missile Swarm, and you just kill your players in one shot. But here's the thing, right? And this is what I love about Viking Death Squad. You know, when you look at other tabletop role-playing games, I'm not going to name any D&D, but they have like a creature rating or something, and it tells you, well, this is the correct mathematical formula to how many monsters your player should deal with. This is like, yo, there are monsters, it gets wild. Figure that shit out. Obviously, you know, since armor is life, the more armor monsters have, the more life they have. And that's all you need to understand. If your players have just started playing and you're like, yo, an Annihilator shows up and it's just wrecking shop, and they start to, you know, oh, we're going to take cover behind a broken down freighter, and we're just laying fire down, and I got my heavy gun because I'm an immortal, and I'm just unloading, you know, fucking like machine gun rounds, 50 cal rounds just into this thing, and it's pink, 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 and the thing turns around and just crushes the freighter. That's the sign the players should just haul ass. Figure it out later. Maybe that's not the fight. You know, and that's what I really love about the monsters, is just it's up to the DM to let your players, and I like this, it doesn't hold your players' hands. It tells you that your players should be intelligent enough to understand the encounter and say, this is something we can't deal with right now. Hopefully you stuck around to the very end. And this is just kind of us giving our opinions. So I've talked a lot, and I know people get annoyed at my voice. I like hearing my own voice, but I know you guys don't, and it's okay. I love you for it. So I'm going to throw this over to Steve. And Steve, what are your thoughts? Good, bad? What are your thoughts?
So when I first read this book, I was just enamored by the entire book. But the more I got to thinking of it, concerning the type of games that we're accustomed to playing, playing like high fantasy type games, I feel that this game will be a great buffer game to when we start getting a little tired or burnt out from our main game. And there's, our main game has got a lot of rules. There's a lot of things going on. There's a spell for every situation. There's a skill that you could use for any situation. And sometimes you just want to go, I just want to kill monsters, have fun, and just do epic shit. This is that game. This is that game we can just have like maybe a 2 or 3 or 4 session stint into doing crazy bullshit by being giant Viking gods from a former time and humans using laser rifles and killing demons and war pigs and playing metal music. Like, that's how I feel about this game. And not to say that you can't play this as a long-term campaign. I just know that our group really likes other types of games, but this would be a great mix-up game where it's like, oh man, we just got to a major part of our game, we're going to put that on pause, and then everyone becomes the ultimate Viking that they really want to be. And you're just calling lightning down from the sky and empowering your axe and just hucking it into a demon's face.
Concur with that statement. It's very much a I don't know how long you would maintain this game, because death is very serious, right? Like,
oh yeah,
it's a very serious thing. Once you run out of armor, if you get tagged once, that's it. From my aspect, my perspective of this game, I like it. Really interesting, very fast, easy to learn. If you've ever played any other ttrpg, you'll pick this up. No worries about that. My one critique of this is, I think, and this is just me, if I was a new GM, I would struggle with this, and because it does ask a lot from both the players and the GM. And the reason why I say that is, when your players sit down and they have a question, and they're new players, right? So everyone's brand new. Let's look at this in the brand new sense. Everyone's brand new, and the player's like, hey, I want to swim. What does the GM do? The GM quickly goes, flip. Oh, there's no swim skill. I don't know, man. Okay, I have to make a test number, right? So I'm gonna roll a test number. So I'm gonna roll 2d6, right? Because at that, maybe it's quicksand, or it's a flowing river of silt, and they have to like swim across it. Okay, so the player's like, cool. Can I use power? Okay, I'm gonna double back and check what power says. Okay, power looks like it's fighting. Maybe, sure. And then that's usually what happens in a lot of new games. Players have questions about how far they can push their box, and then the GM has to be able to have an answer to that. Other systems have answers built into their systems, like this is how you swim, this is how you do diplomacy rolls, right? Like, I want to talk my way out of this. We talk. There is no charisma stat. There's no like, how charismatic is your character stat? Maybe your character really needs to talk their way out of this like thieves' den, and you're trying to figure it out. And that aspect for me as so I'm experienced, right? But even a GM who's played maybe like 2 or 3 sessions of a different tabletop game can sit down and GM this, because they would be able to work that flow in.
Especially coming from a game where everything is in the book. I'll go, okay, well, I'm going to look at this book and say, okay, well, I'm trying to do XYZ. I'm going to look at the XYZ section of the book and go, okay, there's my answer. When there isn't an answer, when people are used to having the answer in a book and then going to a system that the answer is whatever you want it to be, so long as the GM agrees with you, it's a little rough. And even in the book, in the early part of the book when it's talking about how to play the game, they even said, this system expects a lot from the players and the GM more so than other systems, because of the fact that it's so open-ended, where you can, so long as you're reasonable enough in your description, you can use anything. Well, I mean, not everything, but you can use a lot of different things in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
So long as your, thinking and your explanation makes sense. And the GM's like, okay, yeah, I'm on board with that. Or no, you got to roll this instead.
Yeah. No, you can't run speed over the flowing quicksand. No, you're not just going to run straight over it. I would suggest getting this. That the section, the master section, amazing, really useful, helps on a lot of things. The Urth one, the Urth section, you don't really have to. You can skim over that. But all the other sections, super useful, right? 4 out of 5, I would suggest. But with that being said, this is one of the best rules-like games I've read in a long time. So with that being said, I want to say thank you all for listening and hanging out with us. And from myself and from Steve, we are Nothing Venture, Nothing Game. We love rolling dice, giving advice with a little bit of that New York spice. Say goodnight.
Later.